All right, it is 12. Let's go ahead and get started. So welcome. Thank you for joining us for our How to Go Solar and Storage webinar. My name is Zach Snyder. I'm with the nonprofit Solar Oregon. This is a recurring webinar that we do at least once a month. It is for home and business owners. It's something that I love to do, and it's all about how to go solar and storage. We are going to go through a number of topics here. How does solar work? What does it look like? What is the technology? We're going to take a look at, is solar right for your home or business? Particularly, we're going to focus on your home, your site, your roof, things like that, and how that affects how easily you can go solar. We're going to take a look at energy storage, which is a hot topic. And then we will talk about incentives. We'll go over an example budget of how much a solar system costs. And then we'll talk at the end about how to get started, how to select a contractor. We'll conclude with a Q&A, which is really my favorite part of this webinar. So I am here to teach you all about the ins and outs of going solar, but particularly to answer your questions. And so if there's any questions that come up for you as an audience member about the content that I go over, or about solar in general, or things related to solar, or about your home that I might be able to answer, I would love to take those in the Q&A. Just keep that in the back of your mind. I'll show you how the Q&A works here in just a second. But this is what we're going to be talking about today, and I'm super excited to have you join us for this. I'm going to start with just a little introductory information about Solar Oregon. So we're a 43-year-old nonprofit that works to advance the adoption of solar and related forms of clean energy, but particularly solar, across the state. We do that through education, through outreach, through community building, and policy advocacy. Our main program is this How to Go Solar and Storage. So we deliver these webinars. We also deliver in-person How to Go Solar and Storage workshops across the state and venues. You can find all of those on our events calendar. We also deliver special topic presentations, panel discussions, and a look at exciting topics coming up. I'll show you one in a second that's coming up next month you might be interested in. We also host solar tours. We just had our two biggest tours of the year, which are our Go Zero tour, which is a tour of zero energy homes that is always a lot of fun. And we have a link that if you ask, I can email out for the website. You can check out what that tour is all about and maybe see some stories of folks who went zero energy themselves. We also had our solar winery tour, particularly late in the year this year, but I was on vacation, but my other staff and board told me that it was a lot of fun. And besides that, we hold community campaigns and just tell solar stories to help people learn about solar and help them make a decision to see if solar is right for them. We're a member-based nonprofit, so thank you to anybody who's joining us who is a current Solar Oregon member. If you're not, please consider becoming one. It's a really great way to support us and to support solar across the state. You can also make a donation at the bit.ly link there that you see on the right. We host all of our events on Eventbrite. That's where you can find them. You can also find them on our website. I encourage you to follow us on social media, including on Eventbrite, or check out our website. I'm going to go ahead and drop in the chat a set of links, and they're going to come all together here. So there's a number of links, but you'll see one to our website, our events, Go Zero tour, to donate, things like that. So feel free to check that out and refer back to that as I go through the presentation. So I'm going to go through a couple of events here that we've got coming up. These are really exciting. We've got a panel discussion on Tuesday, December 13th. That is a webinar. You can tune in virtually. What's happening with solar recycling? This is something that we get asked about all the time. How does solar recycling work? Can you recycle solar panels in Oregon? And so it should be a really interesting conversation that's going to be hosted by our new program manager, Grace Hardy. And we also, on the same day, on December 13th, that Tuesday, have our annual meeting. That's going to be in the evening. That's an in-person event at Shine Distillery in Portland, Oregon. Come, have a drink, get some food, and socialize with us. And we're going to be talking about solar that evening. This is a celebration. It's also a way for our members to vote on our board elections. So if you are a member, you can show up and vote on new board positions. You'll find both of these events on our Eventbrite. I also want to mention Energy Trust of Oregon, which is an independent nonprofit. They provide a lot of funding to Solar Oregon. They also provide a lot of the incentives available for solar in Oregon, and do a lot of other great work to advance energy efficiency, affordable, renewable energy across Oregon. And so they are supporting this workshop today, other How to Go Solar and Storage events that we've done over the years. And so a big thanks to Energy Trust of Oregon. Finally, before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. This, again, like I said, we're going to have a Q&A at the end. It's one of my favorite parts of the webinar. The way you participate in the Q&A is you have a menu on your screen. If you don't see it, you might have to mouse over your screen, but you'll see a button that says Q&A. You click on that button, it'll open up a dialog box, and you can type your question in there. You can do that at any time during the webinar, and I encourage you to do that. And all questions are good questions. I will try to answer all the questions during the Q&A at the end of the webinar. So please keep that in mind. We also have a chat, which I encourage you to use. That's where I put the links that I just mentioned. That's where you can find those. I also encourage you to use that to say hi, maybe talk with other participants if you so choose. But just note that if you put questions in the chat box, I may miss them. So please try to put all your questions in the Q&A box. And I try to keep the webinars as interactive as possible. I really like that. The first thing that I do here is launch a couple of polls. And so I'm going to launch 3 polls right now. The first one is a location poll. This is just a way for me to get to know who I'm talking to right now, since I can't see you all. This first question is just, where are you joining from? And it goes, Portland, Willamette Valley to other parts of the state, or maybe another state. You guys are pretty quick. I'm guessing this is not your first poll. So I'm going to go ahead and end that, since we have, looks like, most of our responses here. And looks like we've got folks in Portland, a little bit outside of Portland in the Willamette Valley, and maybe some folks from out of state. So welcome. My second poll here is a demographics poll. This is optional, but it gives us an idea of who we're reaching as a nonprofit. It's useful for our funding and all sorts of things. So would appreciate if you took a second to fill that out. This is multiple questions. There's 4 questions on there. So I'll just give a minute for that. All right, looks like I've got most respondents, so I'm going to go ahead and give just a few more seconds, and then I'll close this one out. Thank you guys so much. All right. My last poll at the beginning of the webinar is to gauge your familiarity with a couple of incentives that I'm going to be talking about. These are both incentives offered from the Energy Trust of Oregon. And so these are yes or no questions. Are you familiar with Oregon's Energy Trust of Oregon's standard incentive? And are you familiar with their solar within reach incentive? So I'll just give a minute for that. Right, I'm going to give just a second here. Awesome. So it looks like it's a split on the standard incentive. Some folks are familiar, some folks not sure. Looks like nobody is certainly familiar with the solar within reach incentive. So I'll be excited to tell you all about that a little bit later here. Thanks for indulging me in the polls. Let's dive into how solar works. I'm going to show you here a relatively simple diagram of a solar system. You'll see just a few components here that I'll go through. The one on the upper left is labeled photovoltaic panel. That's your solar panel. Your solar system will have multiple solar panels, but this diagram just shows one of them. Looks like it's floating in the air, but usually this is on your roof. The sunlight strikes the photovoltaic panel, your solar panel, and produces a voltage of electricity. That is the whole goal of solar, and it does it right there at the solar panel. It's very simple, no moving parts, and that's what makes part of what makes solar so easy to maintain and great. The energy produced, the voltage produced, is in a format, however, that is different from the format that your home uses. Reaching back to grade school, you may remember the difference between AC and DC electricity. Solar panels produce DC electricity, but your home circuits use AC electricity. And so in addition to your solar panels, the other core component of your system is called an inverter or a microinverter, which are two slightly different versions of the same thing. And all they do is that they make that conversion from DC electricity to AC electricity. Once that conversion is performed, the electricity gets wired into your home electrical panel. That's your breaker box, usually in your garage. And from there, it goes to power all these circuits in your home, your lights, your appliances, maybe an electric vehicle, if you are charging one of those. And any excess electricity that you produce at any given moment will go out through your utility meter and onto the utility grid, where it can be used in other parts of the grid. Now, your utility meter is a special type of meter when you go solar. You'll actually get that swapped out. Your typical classic utility meter only records electricity coming in from the grid to your home. But when you go solar, you get that swapped out with a bidirectional meter, which also records that flow of electricity back out onto the grid. And that allows you to take advantage of a system called net metering, which is how you get credit for the electricity that you put onto the grid. And I'll talk about that in just a couple slides. But this is the whole picture of how a solar system works. Like I said, very basic, very straightforward. And that's one of the things that I love most about solar. I want to give you a closer look at what an inverter looks like and where you might see them. On the left is an image of a classic inverter. These used to be called string inverters. They're still commonly used. And it's the larger white box here. You'll see the conduit running to it. The conduit piece going up is going up to the roof. Usually the inverter is right next to your breaker panel. So often your breaker panel is in your garage. The inverter will be right next to your breaker panel in your garage. Sometimes breaker panels are in odd locations like a closet or somewhere on the outside of the home, maybe more rarely. You can also put an inverter outside the home, even if your breaker panel is inside, but you'll just have to run that conduit to the breaker panel. But sometimes people choose to do that. On the right, you'll see the underside. This is a ground-mounted solar array, so it's probably not what you'll have on your home, but you can see underneath the panels here, and that gives you a look at these black boxes with the wires hanging out of them. And those are the microinverters. They do the exact same thing as the inverter on the left. So you may be asking the question, what is the point of having an inverter, or microinverters, how I make that decision? Well, they're both good design options. They're both good technology. The main differences is going to come down to, how your installer wants to design your system. And there may be, based on the size of your system, a cost advantage for one or the other. But that's really going to be something that your solar contractor will have the best insight into, whether you should go for inverters or microinverters. There are a couple of ways in which solar can be mounted. Typically, solar is mounted on the roof, and that's especially true in urban environments where you don't really have the space for a ground mount, which is your other option. So on the left, you see the image of the roof mount, on the right of a ground mount. Roof mounts are great because your roof is just sitting there baking in the sun, and you may as well produce your own electricity from that. Ground mounts are certainly possible, and they happen in more rural areas typically. It's typically where you have the space. There are some other trade-offs. Ground mounts, you don't have to put anything on your roof, but you do have to have space, and you also have to run a copper wire from the ground mount all the way to your breaker box. And because of the cost of copper, that can add a little bit of expense. So sometimes there's a price point difference between a roof mount and a ground mount. That being said, these are both great options for installing solar. So I mentioned in the original diagram slide showing a solar system that you get that bidirectional meter, so you can get the credits when you are exporting excess energy that you're producing onto the grid. That system of accounting for those credits is called net metering. And so I'm going to describe net metering to you here in a way using a couple of examples. In Oregon, our climate is such that we have typically sunny summer months, and that's when you're going to be producing a lot of solar energy. In the winter months, we have a ton of cloud cover, especially in Western Oregon. And so we typically have cloudier winter months, not to mention the sun is a little bit lower in the sky, so we just get a little bit less sunshine. So I'm going to show you two graphs. One is of a typical summer month, and one is of a typical winter month. Know that these are generalizations, but the orange bars on these graphs are how much solar energy you are producing during one of those months. So in the summer, you can see it's a big orange bar. That's how much energy you're producing. The blue bar is how much energy you're consuming, all your lights, appliances, electric vehicle, things like that. And you can see that in the typical summer month, your system might be such that you are producing more energy than you're consuming. And this green arrow would be the difference between those bars. And so that's the net metering credit that you would earn in a typical summer month. In a typical winter month, you can see that you're producing much less energy, but you're still using a similar amount of energy. And so you are drawing energy on the whole from the grid. And so that's energy that you are paying the utility company for still. However, these credits that you build up in the summer months can be used to offset what you purchase in the winter months. And that's exactly how net metering works. These credits roll over from month to month. It is important to note that these credits do not roll over from year to year. And this is not the typical calendar year. The year of net metering actually starts in Oregon on March 1st. That's true of the vast majority of utilities and utility customers. There may be a couple of small utility companies out in more rural areas of the state where there are slightly different rules, but it's generally this way even in rural areas. Where the net metering year starts on the 1st of March, that's when you're entering these sunny summer months, you're producing all these credits, and you offset then your winter energy consumption. It's a great system and really allows you to access the value of your solar panels. In the end, what you're really doing is offsetting the money that you would otherwise be paying for purchasing all of your electricity from the grid, which is maybe what you're currently doing. You install solar, and all of a sudden you're seeing those reductions in your energy bills. That's what most people look to when they look to solar. Obviously, solar is clean, renewable energy. A lot of people really love that. But for a lot of people, it really comes down to the bottom line of, is this affordable? Is this a good investment? And the great thing about solar is that you're saving this money over time. Over time, your system will pay itself off. And after that point, you are saving money on the whole on your electricity usage for your family. That's the basics of how solar works. I see a couple of questions in the Q&A. That's awesome. I'm excited to answer those. Keep those rolling throughout the presentation. Again, I'll be answering those at the end. Let's dive now into, is my home right for solar? So this is looking at the characteristics of your site. The first thing I want to talk about is how your site might affect your system size. So how big is a solar system? Well, it really does vary. You can have a solar system that's incredibly small. And in fact, if you want to be technical about it, think back maybe to those TI 87 calculators that had the little solar panel charging your calculator. And then also maybe conjure in your mind the image of a very large solar farm somewhere out in the countryside. Solar is incredibly modular and flexible in terms of its sizing. And even in residential systems, you see a broad range of sizes, maybe from around 5, 6 panels up to 35, 40 panels plus. The average size of system is about 18 panels. But the first thing that's going to determine how big your system size is how much electricity you consume. And this is for the reason that I just mentioned, that your net metering credit, although it rolls over from month to month, it doesn't roll over from year to year. And so if you produce a system that is producing more energy than you're using on an annual basis, you're losing some of the value of your system. And so what you're going to do, what your solar contractor is going to do for you, is design a system that meets but does not exceed your average annual electricity consumption. Other factors that can affect your system size are available roof space. Maybe you just have a small roof, or maybe you have a lot of energy consumption, but a roof that's not big enough to offset all of that. That is possible. A lot of people do find it possible to offset all of their electrical usage, though a lot of people are also constrained a little bit. It's still valuable to install a system, even if it's offsetting just a portion of your electrical consumption. Other things that might constrain your system size are budget, or maybe where you want to put the panels. That's especially true in an HOA situation, where an HOA may have a rule that, yes, you can have solar, but it's only on the side of your home that's facing away from a street. There are people who are limited that way. That's particular to HOAs and other similar types of organizations, and not every HOA is like that. I mentioned that the average size for your system in Oregon is about 16, maybe 18 panels. And that translates into a measurement in the unit is kilowatts. And you don't have to worry at all about what that means. It took me a while to learn and really internalize what is a kilowatt. But I'm going to reference it later when we talk about the going in through an example budget for an average size system. And so that average size is 6 kilowatts. The next thing I want to talk about is how much sunlight are you actually receiving? And there are a couple of things that affect this. One is the orientation of your roof. And so this is a diagram of a home with some solar panels on the south-facing side of the roof. You can see the compass rose beneath the home, and you can see these arcs through the sky and these large basketballs floating overhead. The arc is the path of the sun in the sky. And you can see that that's always going to be in the southern sky because we're in the northern hemisphere. In the winter, it's going to be a little bit lower, in the summer, a little bit higher. Regardless, this means that south-facing roofs are always ideal for solar. That being said, east-facing and west-facing roofs typically work just fine for solar. West-facing roofs work slightly better than east-facing roofs, and that's only because we tend to have somewhat misty mornings in especially Western Oregon. The only roof plane in which you consistently don't see solar being installed is the north-facing roof planes, or northeast or northwest. And so there are a lot of options typically of where you can install solar panels, just not on your north-facing side of your home. Of course, you can also be constrained by shade, and that's particularly true in Oregon, where we have so many large, beautiful trees, and it's horrible to think of them as a nuisance for solar, because they also provide a lot of great shading and cooling for your home. So don't bemoan those trees. Also, if you have a lot of trees around your home, just note that don't be too pessimistic right off the bat. It's hard to sometimes get an intuitive sense of whether a tree is going to shade your home in a way that's going to really limit whether you can go solar. Sometimes it just takes a trained eye. And so solar contractors, they're really good at doing that. They'll first pull your home up on Google Maps, usually take a look at it and eyeball it on Google Maps, and then maybe only later send somebody out to really get a measurement of how much sunlight there is reaching your roof surface. Sometimes it looks as though you have a ton of sun, a ton of wide open sky, but there's just that one object, that one tree or building that is just in the right location to block most of the useful sunshine. So regardless, know that it can be an issue, but it's really hard to tell until you talk to a contractor. Now, your roof, there are a few things about your roof that are important in determining whether you can go solar. One of them is the roof complexity. So I talked about the orientation of your roof. You want south, east, west facing roof planes. That's great. But if your roof plane is broken up into a lot of different pieces, it can be hard to install a meaningfully sized solar system on a roof plane that's broken up like that. So you can see on the left-hand image here, what I'm calling a complex roof plane. You might be able to install some solar panels up on the south-facing upper right portion of the roof here, maybe a couple along the edge toward the left. But there's really, this roof plane would really limit your options for placement of solar panels. On the right, you see a roof structure that is much more simple. You do have a little dormer here over the front door, the garage. But over on the right side of the roof plane, you'd be able to put a lot of solar panels there, and they'd be all contiguous. And so that would just be an easy install. That's one thing that can affect how easy it is to go solar based on your roof. The other thing is your roof condition, your age. And this is important because sometimes you need to re-roof. You need to re-roof periodically on your home. And the question is how often. That is partially dependent on your roof type and the quality of roof that you initially installed. Roofs have different lifetimes. Metal roofs have a very long lifespan, so this is rarely an issue. Asphalt shingle roofs, which are really common, have different lifespans based on the roofing that you installed, but they're typically a little bit shorter than metal. And so that's really where this comes into significance here. When you have to re-roof, you have to re-roof. And when you do that, you have to take off your solar panels, uninstall them, do the re-roofing, and then put your solar panels back on your roof. And you have to hire someone, an electrician usually, to do that for you. An electrician working for a solar contractor usually. That can cost several $1,000s, just the removal and reinstallation of your solar system. And so if you have a roof condition that is poor and you need to re-roof in the near future, it is typically best to wait until you re-roof. When you re-roof, that is an ideal time to go solar, because then you have the entire lifetime of your roof to enjoy your solar panels without having to pay that penalty of uninstallation, reinstallation. To get the Energy Trust of Oregon incentives requires at least 10 years of roof life. And so there's a little bit of a mechanism built into the Energy Trust incentive itself to make sure that you're thinking about your roof condition. Your solar contractor can take a look at your roof and tell you whether you should wait to install solar. The last thing I want to talk about with regard to your roof is your structure. It's what's below your roof. And this, it has an impact on the stability of your roof when you're adding that extra weight of the solar panels on there. There's also some wind shear forces that solar can slightly increase because solar panels are just a few inches above your roof. So this is not a huge issue practically in general. However, we have pretty strict codes here in Oregon, especially right now in Portland, and they may get stricter in other parts of the state too. Here's how you should think about this. Think of roof structures in two general categories. One of them is where you have trusses, and that's the image on the left, and the other is where you have rafters, which is the image on the right. Trusses are where you have these vertical and horizontal support beams, and oftentimes you'll see these metal brackets here attaching the support beams to the main rafters on the underside of the roof. And those trusses mean that you are A-OK for solar. You're not going to have any issue getting a structural permit. Your contractor won't have an issue getting a structural permit for your installation. If you have rafters, you are still most likely going to install solar just fine. The question is, do the rafters span too far of a distance? And if they span too far of a distance, your jurisdiction may require that you get a structural engineer to take a look at your roof plan and run some calculations and determine if your roof needs any reinforcement. The structural engineer can cost some money. Your contractor will hire the engineer, so you don't have to worry about the hassle of it, but it can cost some money. It can also cost some money to have your contractor reinforce your roof for you. So just know that in the worst case scenario, you may have some extra added costs there. Trusses are most new homes have trusses, and some older homes also have trusses. So this is a problem that really only arises for some older homes. So that is an overview of some characteristics of your site that can affect how easy it is to go solar, and maybe whether you'll have any extra added costs there. Those are all things that your solar contractor will take a look at for you. You don't need to be an expert in any of these things to go solar, but hopefully this gives you an idea of what your contractor is looking at, maybe some questions that you can ask your contractor, just to make sure that the folks you're getting quotes from are doing their homework correctly and taking a look at the right things. So the next thing I want to talk about is energy storage, battery storage, and I'm going to talk about this in the context of solar plus storage. So yeah, this is what we're talking about here is when there's a power outage, being able to use electricity in your home, even though the rest of the grid is down. And this obviously can have great advantages for anybody, particularly, I would say, for folks who have medicines that need refrigeration, and that's a critical need of yours, or maybe you just experienced a lot of outages. Regardless, that's what we're talking about when we talk about energy resilience. It's really important to note that solar on its own does not give you energy resilience. It doesn't give you the ability to use your solar power when the grid is down. And that's for some technical reasons to do with not putting out voltage on the electrical grid when the utility line workers are trying to fix it. And that's electrical code. Your solar system won't be able to do that by electrical code. However, you can add a battery, and a battery does give you that capability. And the great thing about solar plus storage is that a solar makes a battery better because your solar system can recharge a battery, and a battery makes your solar system more effective because you can use your solar when there's an outage. And so it's a really great synergy with these technologies. Why do you need to think about this? So there are the typical outages caused by storms and squirrels, which are the two most common things that cause power outages. There are also other threats to the functioning of the electrical grid, the reliability of the electrical grid. One of them is relatively new. It's called public safety power shutoffs. We just had our first one in 2020. This is when a utility company will shut off power in a portion of its grid preemptively to prevent its infrastructure from sparking a wildfire when it's really hot and dry and windy. We saw a number of those recently this summer in various parts of the state. And we saw them in 2020, and it's likely that we will increasingly see more public safety power shutoffs. They do typically affect more rural areas, but those are one threat to your energy resilience. Another is cyber attacks, which is something that the Oregon DOE has identified as a threat. Something that a lot of people think most about and maybe is most dramatic is the Cascadia earthquake zone. We all know about the big earthquake that Oregon is expecting. It's thought that in the Willamette Valley, power may go off for up to 6 weeks. On the coast in Oregon, the power might go off for months. And so that is a more dramatic, longer term type of outage. Solar and storage, you need to think about designing your system in a way where you're understanding what your solar and storage system can do for you and what it can't. But I would say that it's an important technology to consider in all of these cases. So I just want to give you a look at what a solar plus storage system might look like. So you have that visual, solar panels on the roof, and a battery maybe in the garage or in a shed somewhere on your property. There are plenty of battery options. Don't be thinking that there's just one battery technology. Sometimes a contractor will only install certain battery technologies. Actually, that's relatively common. And so if you're particular about which battery model you're installing, you may want to get multiple quotes from multiple contractors and ask them what they install. But there are a number of great products on the market. So what does a battery installation look like? Well, it's important to note that one battery, when you install one battery, almost never will that back up your entire home in a meaningful way. And so what you typically do with a single battery is to do what's called a partial home backup. And this is in contrast to what we call a whole home backup. Partial home backup is where you'll take certain circuits from your circuit breaker. So that might be the circuit breaker in your kitchen to power your refrigerator. It might be a circuit breaker in your hallway, your bathroom, something like that. And you'll just take those circuits and back those up with the battery. When the power goes out, the rest of the circuits in your home will still lose power. That allows you to conserve the capacity of the battery and use it in a more meaningful way. In contrast, if you want a whole home backup, that may require multiple batteries. And because batteries are more expensive, that can add to the cost in a significant way, and that can be prohibitive. But those are two styles of home backup. Home backup, this is an example of multiple batteries being installed to give a whole home backup. So how do you determine what your needs are and what's going to be effective for you? You'll have a pretty involved conversation with your solar contractor, and there will be two main questions that will be asked, and you'll try to find a balance between these two questions. What needs power and for how long? So a typical partial home backup might power a refrigerator to keep food from spoiling, some lights in common areas, and maybe a couple outlets to charge computers, cell phones, keep you connected, make sure you can work, things like that. And the question of how long they operate, the trade-off here is you can add more circuits to your battery, knowing that your battery, if you're using those circuits, will operate for less time. And so that's the trade-off there. And that's where you're going to have a conversation with your contractor about, they'll ask you, what type of appliance you have. Is it Energy Star? And they'll look up how much energy your refrigerator uses on average. They'll look up how much energy your computer is using, and they'll run that calculation and actually figure out how long you might expect your battery to operate during an outage. Lastly, here is just a little image of what is called the essential loads panel. This is for a partial home backup, where I said you choose certain circuits in your breaker panel. Your electrician, with your solar contractor, will actually take those circuits and put them in a separate breaker panel. So you'll have two breaker panels, and this essential loads panel is what will be wired up to the battery. So that's how that works, and that's what that looks like. That's an overview of solar plus storage. Really exciting topic, something that is growing very quickly in terms of the market here in Oregon, and something that a lot of folks are increasingly thinking about. Let's now turn our attention toward incentives and the cost, maybe expected budget of a solar system. So the great news is that if you thought about solar 10 years ago and you're just starting to think about solar again now, solar prices have decreased significantly over the last 10 years. And you can see this chart is just over 10 years. The average cost of solar across the country has decreased significantly. And it was a very rapid decrease at the beginning of the 2010s, and now is more flat. Excuse me. And actually during the pandemic, there's been a little bit of jittery up and down with supply chains, but more or less it's still decreasing on the whole in the long run, just slower than it used to in the past. But solar prices are lower than they used to be. There are great incentives available in Oregon. There is a federal incentive called the Solar Investment Tax Credit, and that is a dollar-for-dollar tax credit, not a tax deduction. That's something that you apply for after you install your solar system. So you will pay for your solar system and then get this incentive afterwards when you file for your taxes the following year. There's also a state solar plus storage rebate that is available in Oregon to folks across Oregon. And that is a rebate that your solar contractor will apply for and receive on your behalf and pass that savings on to you. The same is true of the Energy Trust of Oregon incentives. Energy Trust of Oregon provides some great incentives. I'll go over one here and then one in the following slide. Just note that Energy Trust of Oregon serves the customers of Portland General Electric and Pacific Power. Those are the folks, most of the folks in the state. However, there are some folks who have other smaller utility companies in more rural parts of the state, and also notably some municipalities like Eugene have a public utility. So what are the magnitudes of these incentives? The federal incentive, that's the thing you apply for after you pay for your system as a tax credit, is 30% of the net system cost. And so that's a relatively large incentive. It's a great incentive that was just re-upped this spring as a result of some legislation, which is exciting. And so that was extended for a few years here. The state rebate is up to $5,000 for solar, as well as if you install a battery, an additional $2,500 for the installation of a battery, up to that $2,500. Energy Trust of Oregon has two flavors of incentive. There's their standard incentive. There's also the Solar Within Reach incentive, which I'll talk about in the next slide. The standard incentive is much smaller. This is available to anybody. Solar Within Reach is income based. So that's if you qualify based on your income. And the standard incentive here is $500 for Pacific Power customers, $600 for Portland General Electric customers. So these are some really great incentives available for folks in Oregon to go solar. What does the Solar Within Reach incentive look like? Again, if you want more information about this, you can read about it on the Energy Trust of Oregon website, and I dropped that link in the chat at the beginning of the webinar. I'll also drop this again at the end of the webinar. You can look that up. But this, like I said, is an income-based incentive. and it's much larger than the Energy Trust of Oregon standard incentive. The incentive for Pacific Power is up to $6,000, and in Portland General Electric territory is $7,200. It is based on the size of the system, and so it's $1 per watt incentive. And for Pacific Power, that's $1 per watt. Portland General Electric, that's $1.25 per watt. It may be a hard thing to do to get a grasp on what a watt is. And so the best way to think about this is that if you have a average size system, say that's 16, 18 panels, that's that 6 kilowatt system, you're going to max out the value of these incentives. If you have a smaller system, that's where your incentive might be a little bit less than this $6,000 or this $7,200. But that incentive should max out for anybody getting an average size system or larger. The income thresholds for solar within reach are relatively generous. And so, for example, for a household of 4, the household income should be under $112,860. There's a chart on the Energy Trust of Oregon website you can look up based on your household size, 1 person all the way through, I think, 12-person household. And you can see what the income thresholds are there. But a lot of folks will have access to this solar within reach incentive, which is really great. The state rebate, I just want to make a couple more notes about it. This is offered by the Oregon Department of Energy. Like I said, it's up to $5,000 for solar and up to $2,500 for energy storage, as long as that battery is tied to a solar system. It is also $1 per watt incentive, and the rate is dependent on a couple of things. If you are in Energy Trust of Oregon territory, you have access to Energy Trust of Oregon incentives, you will receive a 20 cents per watt rate on that incentive. If you are outside of Energy Trust of Oregon territory, this is in more rural areas of the state, or as well in some municipal areas where they have public utilities, like Eugene, that's going to be 50 cents per watt. If you are anywhere in the state, but you are below a certain income threshold, you'll get this at $1.80 per watt. And so the average size system won't max out this incentive if you are getting other Energy Trust of Oregon incentives. But if you are, under that income threshold, even with a relatively small system, you should max out this incentive. So let's go over what is usually folks' favorite slide in the webinar, which I think is hilarious because this has no pretty colors or images or anything like that. But everybody is so curious, how much does a solar system cost? Yeah, this is all great information, but I won't know if I can go solar unless I know how much it costs. So I am going to walk through a example budget for a solar system. I'm going to do that for PGE territory as well as Pacific Power territory. However, I need you to take this with a huge grain of salt, because it is very difficult to tell you without knowing anything about your home or your business or your situation, how much your solar system is actually going to cost. And that's for a number of reasons. One of the biggest one is probably not knowing the size of your system. So here we're assuming an average 6 kilowatt system, and that's really important when we're talking about the cost of the system. Other things that I mentioned, including the whether you need an engineer to take a look at your roof structure, whether you need structural reinforcement, whether you need a new roof, that can all have a huge impact on the cost of the system. So keep that in mind, but I'll run through this here. We are going to run through this. You'll see 2 columns of numbers. The middle column here is for someone who does not have access to any of the income-based incentives. The column on the right is for someone who has access to all of the income-based incentives. And what's important to note about that is that the income thresholds are different for the solar within reach incentive and the state rebate. However, that being said, let's jump into this. We are going to assume that a pre-incentive cost for this 6 kilowatt system is $20,000, which is a relatively reasonable assumption. Excuse me. It does depend slightly on the technology you're installing. Often solar contractors will have, the standard workhorse kind of solar panel that is their standard go-to option. And then they might have a premium option. They might have like a middle of the road option in terms of cost. And so you can kind of have that basic, intermediate, premium kind of options for how much you want to pay for your system based on certain factors of the technology. Though all of the technology that is sold by reputable contractors is usually great technology that works well. But let's assume a $20,000 upfront installation cost. The solar contractor is going to apply for, receive, and pass on to you both the Energy Trust of Oregon incentive and the state rebate. So the Energy Trust of Oregon incentive in PGE for a non-income qualified customer is going to be $500. However, if this person is income qualified and can receive solar within reach, that's going to be $7,200. That's a pretty big difference there. That's going to take it down to $19,500 or $12,800 respectively in this example. Next, your solar contractor is going to apply for the state rebate. The good news is right now there's plenty of funding for that rebate. And so you should hopefully have luck with that. It's going to be $1,200 in this example for a non-income qualified customer and $5,000, so maxing it out for an income qualified customer. This brings the out-of-pocket cost to this person to $18,300 if they're non-income qualified, or $7,800. So you notice there's a significant difference there, largely due to the power of the solar within reach incentive from Energy Trust of Oregon. That's what is paid out of pocket by this customer. Next, the 30% federal tax credit is going to be something that they will apply for the next year when they apply for their taxes, they file their taxes. And that's going to take the final net cost of the solar installation down to $12,800 or $5,400. And this is for a PGE customer. You can see these incentives can make a really big difference for going solar. So that's really great. Note that this is the net cost of the installation. Your solar system, of course, will then be saving you money on your energy bills and eventually will pay itself off and be saving you money in the long run on your energy, which is why solar is, I like to think of it as an investment like that. But this is a basic example budget for Portland General Electric. Let's take a look at Pacific Power. I'm not going to run through it in the same level of detail because a lot of the details are relatively similar. We're going to start with the $20,000 cost. The Energy Trust of Oregon incentive is going to be slightly different. It's going to be $600 or $6,000 for solar within reach there on the ladder. And the state rebate is going to be roughly similar here. So the out-of-pocket cost to this customer in Pacific Power is going to be about the same if they're non-income qualified. If they're income qualified, it'll be slightly more than Portland General Electric, but still a really good deal. The tax credit is then applied, and that's going to end up with roughly the same net cost as a Portland General Electric customer, and maybe just slightly higher than Portland General Electric customer for income qualified in this scenario. Hopefully this gives you some kind of idea of what a solar system costs. I know that that's probably a big question on your mind. Please do still take this with a grain of salt. Next, what we're going to talk about is how you get started on getting quotes to see what solar will actually cost for you in your home, in your situation. So how do I get started? The Energy Trust of Oregon, besides providing really great incentives for solar, but besides helping to support great educational resources like the ones that Solar Oregon works so hard to provide for you, is one thing that they do is to rate solar contractors, and they qualify solar contractors. So a solar contractor can be certified as an Energy Trust of Oregon trade ally. Only Energy Trust of Oregon trade allies can take advantage of the Energy Trust of Oregon incentives. So it's really great to go with a trade ally, not just because you get the Energy Trust of Oregon incentives if you are eligible for those, but also because they're rigorously qualified and they actually are given a star rating. And that's a rating that is maintained and changed based on their performance as judged by Energy Trust of Oregon. And Energy Trust does a pretty good job of doing that. And so I highly suggest that you go with an Energy Trust of Oregon trade ally, no matter where you are in the state, if you have access to one. And there's a really great tool. So I'm going to drop the links back in the chat. Again, it's going to be the same links that I dropped above, but just to put them top of mind here for you. This tool provided by Energy Trust of Oregon is a simple online web form where you are inputting your basic information about you, your site, your address, what you're looking for. And Energy Trust of Oregon will take your information, randomly select 3 highly rated trade ally contractors who work in your area and send your information to them. They will get back to you and within 3 days and offer you a free quote. That's a really great way, really quick and easy way to get a sampling of quotes from different companies that you know will be reputable and do good work. And it's a great way to compare the offers from multiple companies, see what you like about the company, see what you like about the technology they want to install for you, see what you like about the price. So if you look at the links that I put in the chat, this link is going to be titled Energy Trust Solar Bid Tool. Save that link, or you can just go to it now, fill it out right after the webinar, or right now while you're listening. And it's a great way to get those quotes. What does installation look like? So say you've gotten your quotes from your contractors, you've evaluated them, you've decided on the contractor that is a best fit for you, and now you're ready to sign the contract. What happens? Well, solar installation is a turnkey service, and that means that you sign the contract, you might pay a portion of the system costs up front, and then pay the rest of it when the system is done, or however the solar contractor wants to structure those payments. But when you sign, the solar contractor then goes and does all of the legwork to design the system, secure your permits for your installation, and schedule your construction date. So it may be a few months after you sign your contract before your actual construction date. That's because it can take some time to get those permits, apply for the incentives, things like that. However, you don't have to do anything during that time. And when your construction date comes up, solar installation itself is relatively quick and painless. It's usually a 1 to 2 day process, depending on the size of your system and maybe your location. But it's really quick. After the solar installation process, there will be a couple things your contractor will still need to do. One of them is manage your inspections. They'll also get your bidirectional meter swapped out by your utility. They'll arrange that for you. They'll also then finally arrange for your utility to do what's called interconnection. And then your solar contractor will come and turn your system on. And that is the moment when your home will start producing its own clean, renewable energy for you to use and for you to save on your electricity costs with. So that's the process of solar installation and what you can expect, but relatively quick and painless. And at the end, you have a solar home. So that is our How to Go Solar and Storage webinar. I'm thrilled that you are here to join us today. We are going to dive into Q&A, and I hope it's a really good Q&A session. I'm going to try and answer all the questions you have. I see a few in the Q&A box right now. I do want to open our last poll, which is a post-event survey, and your feedback is very much appreciated. We use this to track how we're doing and make sure that we are doing what we think we're doing. So I'm going to leave that up for a few minutes while we dive into this Q&A and while you are thinking of your next Q&A questions. I am going to start here. Joshua Lee asks, even with AC, and I think There's another question here, so I wonder if these are sequiturs. With hot summer months, would a typical residence just reduce electrical usage, or would it produce a surplus? Typical residence just reducing. So I think there's two parts of the same question. Maybe the question is during a summer month. I believe, Josh, and let me know maybe in the chat or in the Q&A if I'm getting this wrong, but you're asking what during the summer months, if you have AC, are you going to have more or less consumption? How is that going to affect whether you have a surplus or not? Your electrical consumption will vary over the course of a year. And that's based on, especially on climate factors and how you heat and cool your home. And that's because the majority of the energy that you use in your home is used for heating and cooling air and water. And if you have AC, that is when you'll have potentially a spike in energy consumption in the summer. If you have a condensed electric, thermoelectric water heater, that is a situation in which you might see your energy spike in the winter. Or if you have floorboard heating can be really inefficient. So you will have peculiarities in your home of how your consumption will vary over the course of the year. In terms of whether that means you have a surplus, I would encourage you to, there's all sorts of ways you can slice and dice this problem of, are you producing, more energy or less energy than you're consuming at any given moment? What about minute by minute? What about day by day? I would encourage you to think of it over the course of a whole calendar year, because that's the course over which you are getting credit and using that credit for your energy. And again, at the end of the net metering year, you're going to forfeit any excess credits. And so the basic calculation, you can really simplify how you think of whether your solar is adequately offsetting your usage just by thinking of, is my solar energy system going to produce roughly how much I use on average of electricity during the year? So there's all sorts of ways you can analyze at any given moment, but I think that's roughly what you're asking, and hopefully I answered what you were asking there. Gabe asks, why is the federal investment tax credit, so that's the main federal 30% incentive, smaller for the low middle income person? I'm not, that doesn't really track for me. I hope I didn't say that. The federal incentive tax credit is it's a 30% for everyone right now. There are some changes that were introduced for the federal incentive that were legislated this spring that are there's kind of a grace period in which the standard is currently the flat 30%, and then those changes will take effect. But that doesn't really have to do, to my knowledge, with the income of the person installing solar. More has to do with the labor practices of the company that's installing it. So I might have, hopefully I didn't misstate anything, but hopefully that clarifies for you anything that I said. Oh no, chat is disabled. Thanks for letting me know, Joshua. Are folks, if anybody wants to put in the Q&A, if folks are able to see the links that I put in the chat, I think that that's the most important thing in the chat. So these are great questions. There's one more here. Hopefully we've got some more that folks are typing out. Gabe also asks, if my roof is shaded, can I participate in community solar? Can you talk a bit about that? That's a great question. So what I've been talking about this entire webinar is something called net metered solar. That's where you own the solar system on your roof and it powers your home and the circuits in your home. Of course, any excess solar goes out to the grid. But that's what I've been talking about. There is another form of solar called community solar that started here in Oregon in 2020. So it's relatively new, but there's been a lot of fanfare about community solar, and I think it's a great program for a lot of folks in particular situations. The way community solar works is there is a system somewhere on the grid, say it's on the roof of a community center or a church or something like that, or maybe it is off in the countryside and it's just a big solar farm. Regardless, you can subscribe to the energy produced by that solar system in lieu of the payments that you're making to your utility company. So you'll still pay to the utility company, but you'll be paying for the energy coming from the community solar system. This is a great system in a couple of ways. One, anybody in a specific utility territory, so say you're a customer of Portland General Electric, anybody in Portland General Electric can subscribe to any community solar system in Portland General Electric. And so if you have a shaded roof, or say that you rent and you have an apartment and you can't put solar on your roof because you don't own the building, this is a great option in those situations in particular, or for folks who just don't want solar on their roof or don't want to pay for solar on their roof. You can sign up for community solar. Know that you are benefiting solar in Oregon, and at the same time saving a little bit of money on your energy bills. And this comes in two general flavors. One is if you are income qualified, one if you're not. If you're income qualified and you subscribe to a community solar system, you'll be getting a more significant energy savings on your bill. And that is, it's going to vary because you're actually getting the energy produced, and the energy produced by the system does vary, whether it's a hot and sunny day or a cloudy day. But on average, I would hazard to set your expectation that if you're income qualified, you might save up to maybe 30%, maybe even a little bit more than 30% of your energy costs by switching to community solar. And all you got to do is sign up for it. If you are not income qualified, you'll still typically receive on average, maybe around 5% energy savings. And so there's incentive for you to do it, however moderate. And again, it does support solar in Oregon. So I would encourage you to look at that. I am going to put in the chat the link to the Oregon Community Solar Program. You can also look this up. It's oregoncsp.org. But let me just put this in the chat. Solar. You can sign up there and find resources there all about community solar. So that's a great question. It looks as though that was the last question that is currently in the Q&A box. I will give just another minute here in case anybody is typing out a question. However, I do want to thank everybody for coming to the webinar. Thank you for filling out the post-event survey. I really appreciate that. I will be sending up a follow-up email with a link to the recording of this webinar and a list of links to the links that I posted in the chat to resources that might be useful to you in your solar journey. We put this workshop on to help folks in your situation learn about how to go solar and storage in a reliable way that helps you make a decision. So I hope that this workshop has done that for you. It looks as though we don't have any further questions, so I'm going to go ahead and close it out. Thanks so much, and hope to see you at our December events, including our solar recycling webinar on the 13th at noon, and also later that evening if you are in the Portland area. Hope to see you at Shine Distillery. It should be a really good time for all. Take care and see you next time.